Sienna God, hello all. Good afternoon, good afternoon. Why don't thank you for watching. So this is day 13 of reading Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. And I'm going to tell you, I don't feel like reading it. Not because it's not good, because I have like a cold or something. And I'm like, oh God. Anyway, so took yesterday off. We got to go see our daughter who lives like 4 hours away from us, and it was really cool. We were able to pack in enough to where we still had a good time and we didn't feel like we were dying. I just I don't mean dying in the sense of like actually dying. I mean where you're going to be like super exhausted and then you can't get anything done the next day. Yeah, like that. But anyway, it was the best. So tired from that as well. I'm the only driver, so I was driving 8 hours and then interacting with everybody, doing everything, all the things. Anyway, one result of this was that for centuries, whatever educated class existed in Eastern Europe read and wrote primarily in languages other than their own vernaculars, which had no comparable serious literature. This association of class with language was so strong that even when Czech nationalism developed within the Habsburg Empire, and that's Hapsburg, those nationalists published their patriotic and anti-German tracts in German. When they wrote in Czech in the 18th century, they wrote such things as children's stories or light romantic novels, or they wrote translations from German or other languages. When the Ukrainian or Byelorussian, Byelorussian languages began to be used in plays, they were used in dialogue for comic characters. The rise of an indigenous intelligentsia, intelligentsia, so it's intelligent with SIA at the end, was marked by their resentment of such cultural subordination, a resentment and a promotion of group identity that they spread to other members to their respective groups. This was as true among the Russians as among the Czechs or Latvians, Latvians. The historic lag of Eastern Europe and the Balkans behind the development of the rest of the European continent has had enduring consequences. At the beginning of the 19th century, the average real income per capita in Eastern Europe was only half of what it was in Britain, and that gap widened as Britain developed more rapidly during that century. At the beginning of the 21st century, the nations of the European Union as a whole, centered in the West, had doubled the per capita income of most Eastern European countries. Western Europe also had a longer tradition of free democracies and societies open to international cultural, technological, and economic influences. Throughout the long centuries from Roman times to the 19th century, the Germans lived and concentrated in Central Europe in what is today Germany and Austria, were economically and technologically more advanced than the populations of Eastern Europe, but lagged behind those of Western Europe. In the early 19th century, Britons, Britones, came to Germany to create railroad systems, and Germans went to Britain, Britain, to study the advanced technology of the times. Germans, however, were for centuries the principal intermediaries through whom the advances of the West moved eastward with a lag. German cultural influence pervaded the urban centers of Eastern Europe from the Baltic to the Adriatic. Over the centuries, the interactions of the Germans and the Slavs have ranged from economic to military. In the Middle Ages, the Mongol, Mongol, invaders from Central Asia forced Slavic populations westward from the Ukrainian steppes, steppes, and the Slavs in turn forced the Germans westward. Later, the Germans forced the Slavs back eastward, with the Oder, River forming a boundary between them, then as now. But Slavic-German interactions were not limited to the interactions of whole societies. Enclaves of Germans were scattered throughout medieval Eastern Europe, bringing with them craft, industrial, and agricultural skills more advanced than those of the Slavic regions. Many products of Western European societies, from coins to castles, moved eastward in medieval times. So did more advanced agricultural methods, such as improved plows, the horse collar, and and new systems of crop hold on a minute. Get it together. Okay, so did more advanced agricultural methods, such as improved plows, the horse collar, and new systems of crop rotation. Germans living in Eastern Europe became, in effect, enclaves of Western Europe culture there. The landed nobility of Eastern Europe often deliberately attracted German farmers by allowing them to settle in towns and villages under German laws. Hundreds of villages in Silesia, Silesia, were under German law at the end of the 13th century, and more than 1,000 by the middle of the 14th century, when more than 100 towns were also under German law. Germans were the predominant population in many Eastern European cities during the Middle Ages, while the Slavic populations predominated in the countryside. Until 1312, the official records of the city of Krakow, Krakow, were kept in German, and that year they began to be kept in Latin. Gosh, that's got to be like difficult to follow along with if you're like living in the place during the time of the switch. It was decades later that when Poles became a majority of the population of the city. For centuries, rural and urban populations differed in ethnicity throughout Eastern Europe and the Balkans. During the Middle Ages, most of the towns founded in Croatia and Transylvania were founded by Germans. Adriatic port cities, such as Dubrovnik, developed under Italian cultural influence in Sarajevo, Sarajevo, under the cultural influence of the Turks. In Romania as well, Romanians were not only a minority in many of the towns and cities, they were a subordinate minority, working as servants and unskilled laborers, while Germans, Jews, and others predominated in higher level occupations. Even after Slavs and other Eastern European populations became, over a period of centuries, numerically predominant in the cities of the region, Germans remained the elite in such cities as Riga, R-I-G-A, and Prague, Prague, and members of the local populations who wished to rise economically and socially had to learn to speak German and become part of the German culture in order to do so. One reason for the German cultural predominance was simply that they were literate much more often than the indigenous populations of Eastern and Central Europe. Most Russians, for example, were illiterate in the late 19th century, but 94% of the Germans in Riga, or Riga, R-I-G-A, could read and write. In the Austrian Empire, even as late as the beginning of the 20th century, the illiteracy rate of Polish students was 40%, and among Serbo-Croatians was 77%. I mean, I did not think it was like that. I know that, like, people have to have access to things, either by, like, regionally, like, you know, like, they can actually, like, go and walk to a place where they can then learn, or they have to have the stuff in the homes, or the time to do it, or whatever it is, or they're, like, under some sort of regime that doesn't want you to learn anything, or however. But, like, I literally didn't think, just like I didn't think that slavery existed to the extent that it did in some of the different areas of the world. But yeah, I don't know why I didn't. I guess the reason why I didn't think about it like that is because, as far as like illiteracy goes and stuff, because we weren't ever taught that, right? We were taught, like, if somebody was illiterate, it was because someone was keeping them from being illiterate, or it was the fact that their financial situation meant that the kids had to stay and help. So they were allowed to go, but then pulled, or they were delayed and then allowed to enter later. But, like, I didn't know it was on, like, a massive scale like that. I'm gonna make it, okay? Okay, so I'm going to reread it. In the Austrian Empire, even as late as the beginning of the 20th century, the illiteracy rate of Polish adults was 40%, and among Serbo Croatians was 77%, but among Germans, only 6%. Education, however, was just one symptom of a vast difference in skills between the indigenous populations of Eastern Europe living overwhelmingly in the countrysides and the skills of the outsiders living in urban enclaves among them. Merchants from the indigenous populations in East Central Europe were usually unable to compete successfully with more experienced merchants who came from Western Europe and other places with a long history of commerce. Even in agriculture, places with rich soil, such as Romania and Russia, had lower crop yields than those in Western Europe, with agricultural practices were more advanced. The difference was in the people rather than the soil. German farming communities in Eastern Europe likewise had higher crop yields than those of the surrounding populations. During the Middle Ages, the mining skills for which Germans became widely known led to the establishment of predominantly German mining communities in the Balkans. German priests converted the Czechs to Christianity, and the University of Prague, the first university in Eastern Europe, was founded in 1348. Oh, wow. With a predominantly German faculty. Dorpat, D-O-R-P-A-T University in Riga, or Riga, R-I-G-A, established by the Tsar in 1802, was likewise, in effect, a German university on Russian soil, with nearly half its faculty coming from Germany itself. Although Germans were only about 1% of the population of the Russian Empire, they lived clustered in enclaves, both urban and rural, that remained culturally German for centuries. In the 1860s, more than half the Russian Foreign Ministry was German, as were nearly all members of the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences. Polish authorities imposed German agricultural practices on Polish peasants. German words crept into the languages of Eastern Europe and Slavic rulers in medieval Mecklenburg, Mecklenburg, gave their children German names. In Russia, there were such phrases as, in quotes, or I should say, quote unquote, as punctual as a German, end quote. I don't know. Anyway, I need a nap. And quote unquote, as honest as a German, end quote. I don't know. The transfer of skills and cultures into Eastern Europe was by no means always socially harmonious. However, those who had cultural advantages resisted having their cultures diluted by the culture of the indigenous people around them. Oh, wow. Yeah, that can happen, can't it? I wonder if they saw that as a good thing themselves, but then other people saw it as discrimination or something, right? And the indigenous, I mean, we're doing it now, like to this day. And the indigenous people resented those. Oh, here we go. Hold on. Let me back it up. Those who had, because I busted up a sentence is what I did by my talking. Those who had cultural advantages resisted having their cultures diluted by the culture of the indigenous people around them. And the indigenous people resented those advantages in the foreigners who had them. Oh, wow. During the Middle Ages, Slavs were barred from membership in some German guilds in Eastern Europe, and members of those guilds who married Slavs were subject to expulsion. Oh my. Conversely, Germans were barred from employment in a Polish hospital founded in the 14th century, and an organization founded among Czechs in that same century required that those admitted must be, in quotes, born from two Czech-speaking parents. Whoa. End quote. Mob violence was unleashed against Germans in Krakow in this same era. With the eventual rise of an indigenous educated class, resentments were fanned as these newly educated people led in the promotion of a group identity movement. Led in the promotion of group identity movements. No, I read it right. Intolerant of outsiders and insisting on preferential treatment and the imposition of the group's language and symbols on others. Oh, that ain't good. In 1892, for example, like they took it all the way. You know what I mean? Like all the way left. Like out in the left field, like way out there, right? I can understand by not like in your household you're practicing this or whatever it is, right? And these customs, these traditions, and then outside of your home you're intermingling with people on various levels depending upon your job and everything, and then people just get their stuff based on qualifications. I mean, that's how it should be, right? Anyway. In 1892, for example, street signs in Prague, which had been written in both German and Czech, were changed to become exclusively Czech. Whoa. Group identity movements were not confined to Czechs by any means, but were led by the intelligentsia, INTELLIGENT including students and lawyers among a number of groups in the Habsburg Empire. It was much the same story in the Russian Empire, where an emerging Latvian educated class, educated at culturally German Dorpat University, promoted group identity agitation in the Baltic. Okay, so hang on. Have you noticed that, like, throughout this book, like throughout history, whatever, all these things that have been tried and they've failed because they're morally, like, not cool, or, like, I don't know, they're just bad, right? They're being repeated. You know, they say that if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, or you're bound to repeat it. We're repeating it because they keep on erasing it. They keep on removing it out of museums, out of textbooks, out of whatever, movies, TV shows, whatever, and then they insert whatever it is they want. And we don't really know what went on, what worked, what didn't, how it was, like, used and all of that. And, like, this heathenistic stuff is happening, like this self-segregating thing and all of that, right? It's happening. It's the same thing, different day. You know what I mean? Same thing, different decade, different century, different year, whatever. However you want to frame it, it's the same stuff, which is, to me, is crazy town banana pants. But they keep on pushing equality and all that junk. You know what I mean? Like, I say junk because the same stuff that they're pushing, it's like they're doing the opposite, though. You know what I mean? It's the rope-a-dope is what it is. Okay, okay. It was much the same story in the Russian Empire, where an emerging Latvian educated class, educated at culturally, yeah, I already read that. Among Germans of this later era, whether in the Habsburg or the Russian Empire, as cosmopolitan attitude long prevailed, rejecting arguments or policies based on ethnic origins, and welcoming into the German culture the educated classes of Latvian, Czech, Jewish, or other origins who chose to share in that culture and achieved mastery in it. Okay. Yeah, so they formed their own, like, good old boys club. You know what I mean? The very thing that people don't like, they formed it. Hey, if you believe in this, then you're good with us, and then you can excel and whatever, prosper. German was the language of the Prague's educated classes, whether in business, the clergy, or the military, regardless of the ancestry of the individuals involved. That's really hard. Think about it. You have to learn a completely different language just because. Not because you physically moved to another country, but because they changed it on you. So, like, here in Texas, we're speaking English. Well, if somebody comes in and takes over, now we're speaking something else. And that's why in the military, I'm just like, you know, these people are who are doing crazy things. I'm like, I fought for your freedom, you're welcome. Otherwise, you'd be speaking fill in the blank, right? Anyway. However, the unrelenting promotion of group identity politics by others, directed against people of German ancestry, eventually led to a defensive solidarity among the Germans, and thus to ethnic polarization. They're only going to cling to their own. You know what I mean? If you keep on pushing them, like, that's what they're going to be doing. The full and the fatal fruition of these group antagonisms would come only in the 20th century, when discrimination and violence against Germans in Czechoslovakia, for example, made them ripe for Nazi propaganda and willing accomplices of Hitler's takeover of that country. Elsewhere in Eastern Europe, including the Soviet Union, abused German minorities likewise collaborated with the German invaders during the Second World War, and many of them accompanied Hitler's armies on their retreat back into Germany. After the war, millions of Germans, whether collaborators or not, were forced to go, quote-unquote, back to Germany from Eastern Europe, many of them dying either from mob violence against them or from the brutal conditions in which they were suddenly seized and transported. It's a dang shame. Don't go hang, we make a chance, we meet again, love you, minute.